I think that plays into, that's a good segue from last session to this session. But this session, that's what we're talking about is discipline patiently and consistently. And everything revolves back, as I've said over and over again, to the modeling, right? So if you're living in a maybe world and there's no definition and things are a little loose, when it comes to discipline, you can't really be consistent in that either, because you're not modeling it, you're not setting those guidelines. So then when it comes to discipline, all of a sudden to a little kid, it feels like you're being, over the top, because everything else is like maybe or later or, probably. And then all of a sudden I'm getting spanked. And that's such a black and white, consequence for something when the rest of the world isn't so tight. So it's really important to find that consistency in everything, so that when it comes to the harder things in discipline, you're you're not up against the wall because everything else is so gray. So really challenge you guys to continue to look at everything you can, and talk about it in your couch time, to talk about what is working and what's not. Where can you guys be more consistent? And Victoria and I were talking about this tonight with this session and next session, and so much of it just revolves around you two being on the same page. Doesn't matter what we teach, what we talk about. There's 24 different ways to discipline and do things. But if one of you is doing it one way and the other one is doing it another way, there's another maybe. There's another disconnect for the kids. So, it's really important that you take this stuff and make it your own and pull it together and make sure that you have a consistency as a couple. Because if Tim, like if you discipline one way and Lauren does another, here we are. It's like, I'm confused. Michael's going to be like, wait a minute, that doesn't add up, So it's really important to find that consistency. Okay. So again, that's what we wanted to talk tonight about. It's just in disciplining your kids. And again, we're not talking about exactly how you do. We're not talking about spanking. We're not talking about that yet. But we're talking about anything, any discipline, raising your voice, even, threatening and all the things we said not to do, it's exhausting. And we all know that in order to do it consistently, it takes more time. And most of us don't take the time to get on the same page, to then be consistent, and then take the time with the kids in order to do it, as a coach. I mean, how many do you feel like you're actually coaching your kids versus barking orders at them? Dave, you're a coach, right? Because your daughter's acting.
I'm like a dog, I bark.
Do you guys feel like you did more barking and not enough coaching?
Yeah, probably.
I mean, as athletes, a lot of athletes, and even a soccer player.
Oh my gosh. So, gosh.
Jeez. I'm sorry.
We got a lot of soccer players here.
But how many of us reacted well to a coach that screamed all the time? I mean, some people do. I never did. I liked when they came along and encouraged me as much as they barked at me, right? So as parents, we really have to find that ability, and each kid's going to need to be coached differently. Some are soccer players and some aren't, I mean, so, you just have to learn how to coach them. So how do you all think you are as coaches versus dictators for your kids?
Tim's definitely a good coach. Like, he's much more than I am. I try, but sometimes I think I just go more to the barking or dictator. But Tim's really good at like coaching them through, or just kind of like rewarding them, not with like material things, but just like that was great listening. Thanks for listening so well. So he definitely has more patience.
Good. How do you gain more of that, Lauren?
I mean, just biting my tongue and realizing like, yes, I have them all day, but just knowing like they don't mean any harm by it and they're just learning. And I mean, like I grew up, my mom was very patient. She really didn't like yell at us a ton. So I always knew when she did, she was very upset. So I feel like that was kind of a good thing because then I knew it was like really bad.
Yeah, that's another way too. You kind of, you treat your kids often how you were modeled. Some parents were tough on you guys and some weren't. So sometimes you have to kind of unlearn the model that was modeled for you.
And I like how, Lauren, how you noticed how your husband's modeling it. You know, I don't know, Tim, if you realize that you're setting an example. I'm sure, I know sometimes John will be a lot more patient on things, and it sets a tone for me, an example for me to go, okay, let me take a breath. You know, he's doing it the right way. You take a breath and do it differently. So I think that's good to recognize.
I also think that, you know, we all have to learn, you know, there's definitely a choice in that to be a coach. We all can coach. You know, we all are going to be different in how we coach, but we all can coach better, kind of have that mindset of, you know, not being the barker, the dictator, but, you know, really coaching. And some of us might be a little more harsh than others. And, you know, again, it's not a matter of trying to be just like Tim as much as improving and not being frustrated, even though you're with the kids all day and it's a challenging issue not to be frustrated. But, you know, it only takes those little shifts, you know, if you can just make those minor shifts and tomorrow handle it slightly different and choose what that is. For me, I need really clear like triggers, like what I need to make a decision in advance before I'm in the middle of the frustration to say, you know, I'm going to try it. And this is something maybe you guys could talk about. We're going to I'm going to try to do it differently. Tomorrow when that happens, I'm going to ask them to go sit somewhere for 5 minutes so I can just clear my head. And then I'm going to go talk to them for 5 minutes. You know, I don't know what it is, but, you know, choose to do some of those things differently so that you guys can truly coach. Both of you can be coaches, not just one be really good at it and the other one be the frustrated barker. What about you guys, Chris and Natalie? How are you guys being consistent?
With consistency or barking?
Either or. How do you coach?
Oh, I mean, I bark a lot. Consistency, I think, is our biggest thing, and I think it's because I'm home with them like all day, usually barking, and then he comes home and is a little bit more chill, and then expectations become something else. So I think that's our biggest thing. That's my biggest frustration because I know it's a thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Anything you can do different from your perspective?
Be more patient, be less busy.
What? That's gonna be changed.
I think when you said
That's one of the reasons why.
I think when you explain stuff to them too, like even if they're not getting ready and you're just getting kind of agitated just because you got to get out the door, like explaining to them next time, hey, you need to do this so that this doesn't happen, and I'm going to give you plenty of time to do that because of this. You know, like it's just hard to do that though when you got 100 million things going on. So,
and it's you know, that's a time to also stop and pray. We don't do that very often in the midst of chaos. A lot of times we just try to fix it. and trusting God in it and praying. And just that mechanism of prayer slows you down enough maybe to see it from a different light. And we don't always feel like we have enough time to do that, but I guarantee you that will change.
It'll definitely change because you're inviting the Holy Spirit in, and then you'll be able to see God at work changing you. So even taking a few minutes before the kids get home and saying, just set a timer or whatever, 2 minutes. Lord, they're coming in. I'm short-tempered today. Please give me patience and gentleness with them. And, I need you now type of thing. But, God will do the rest.
And this has been a consistent theme through all of these studies is, again, pulling back and looking at your calendar and starting to say no. Because as the kids get older, it just gets crazier. They get more involved, and something's got to give. We can't keep the pace. So, Sam and Maureen, how are you guys? I mean, you don't have to do a whole lot of coaching yet, but you could start with each other, just like you're giving each other 5-minute rule now. So how do you feel like you are?
I mean, I think we are fairly consistent. I think probably one of the issues is that I'm a little too patient, whereas Maureen may give McLaren 1 or 2 opportunities where I'm just kind of like, let it go on for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm like, okay, we're done. We had enough. So I think that's probably where, our inconsistency comes in at, is where I'm just a little too patient at times. And sometimes I have to reel it back in, like, okay, no, I need to be more consistent with Maureen, keeping him on the same schedule with things.
And again, it's that making sure you're on the same page.
Yeah.
And how you do it. Maureen giving up a little and you giving down, like just coming to middle, because it really does make a huge difference. And now your son is young and you've got another one on the way, but I'm telling you, it doesn't take long for them to realize that you guys are in unity or you're not, and that's just confusing for a little kid. And that's how they get, they start to have obedience issues and discipline issues and relationship issues, so again, they're really looking for that, and they're hungry for that consistency and that unity. So welcome, Liz. Glad you could join us after your other meeting. Dave said you had. What about you guys? Coach or dictator?
In our house, Liz is a really good coach.
Good.
I tend to just say I want something done a certain way and expect that they're just going to say yes, sir, and get it done. And that's probably rarely the case. And so I should probably be more patient and get on their level and take the time to explain what I mean or why I mean it. But Liz does a really good job with that.
One thing I would caution everybody on is, because I regret not doing some of this stuff when my kids were little, because I was really impatient and frustrated, and I let Molly do the heavy lifting in that, but it really put a disconnect between me and the kids. And I just didn't feel like I had that emotional connection that I could have. I think we're connected, but I feel somewhat disconnected because I didn't take the time to really find that or take that opportunity to do what I'm telling you guys. Take less, look at my calendar, do less, so that I could just be emotionally connected and be there for my kids and not just let my wife do it. So I would just really, don't miss this opportunity, because you'll regret it if you don't. And it's up to the person that's not the good coach to learn how to be that for their kids, because the bond that you'll make through your stretching. I heard, what was it? The wisdom I heard on American Idol from, what's his name?
Lionel.
Lionel Richie, the famous prophet, Lionel Richie. He just said that the beginning, what did he say?
Life begins
Life
at
begins
the
at the end of your comfort zone.
That's good.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty deep. Because I stayed in my comfort zone emotionally if I'd stepped out of that, I would have had much deeper relationships. So anyway, what about you guys, Sammy and Nathan? Barker, coach.
I think I start my day off more as a coach, but then as the day goes on and I get more tired and kind of over my children, I start barking. But then it's perfect because then Nathan comes home and I can, his turn.
I think I've been focusing on that more. I think I used to be and still am a lot of bark. But the thing you said about Kiki the other week when she tries to talk to, like I picture Kiki getting down on Colt's level and tries to really explain things to him. And so I've been trying to do more of that, just explaining why, and even just taking time to answer his questions or explain why he shouldn't be doing things. And the other thing that helps me with consistency is the whole thing about if they need to be spanked, not spanking them right away, just sending them to their room at first. And even though that's hard sometimes for me, it makes it a lot easier in terms of consistency because you do that first and then you go in and I talk to them and then they get spanked if they need it, So those 3 steps there, go to your room, I'll be in a little bit, then we go talk about it and then they get spanked, make it pretty simple to stay consistent.
That's good. That's really important. Again, it's whether it's prayer or just a few minutes or 10 minutes or whatever that gap is, removes the reaction for anything. And it adds some thinking space for you to really evaluate what you're going to do. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about punishment next week, but the biggest challenge in discipline and patience is just what Nathan said, is don't react. Don't react with your voice. Don't react with your hand. Just don't react and punish your children because you're making scars that you cannot heal. You might say something, and again, both the same should be certainly with you as couples. You should not react. Like bite your lip and make it bleed if you have to before you start to react, because that's when the damage is done. So, good. Well, I want to give you guys some space to break out into small groups. And if you got the PDF, if you look at page 38, there's actually a list of 9 things to consider, and a lot of them the things we just discussed about how to discipline patiently and consistently. So if you could look at that on page 38 and kind of use that as some talking points in your small groups and just talk about how you all can do that better for each other as a couple and for your children. And then when we come back, you guys can give me one takeaway from your breakout group. Any questions? What's that?
Nothing. It was just saying hi to Nathan.
All right, let's go around and 2-minute takeaways. Chris, since you're on, you can start.
Okay.
2-minute takeaway. I think the count your blessings is important. All these points are pretty good. What was the one that we just were talking about right before?
Count your blessings.
That was a count your blessings.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you want to add something?
What's happening? I think for that one specifically, we were just talking about like all the little stuff that we tend to get angry and like annoyed and whatever on. They're just such minimal things to even focus on. So it's just like focus your energy and everything on what really matters.
We had a great idea come up in our marriage group. One of the couples, they have a kind of a nice journal. They call it their blessing book. And what they do is every week they both write in the book positive blessings, things that God did. And then they take time each week to just read it, because they don't talk about it when they write it in. So then they take some time during the week to read together the blessings, and it just keeps them focused on the positive things and the blessings, because we can so quickly get tied up in the negative and the constant craziness and lose track of all the great things that God's doing week by week. So highly recommend doing that. So Sam, Maureen, you were with Chris and Natalie. Did you get some great wisdom?
Yeah, it's always really nice hearing what everyone has to say about, just where they're at in their parenting. So we can kind of start to think, like I tell Sam all the time, like, oh my gosh, that's a good point. Oh my gosh, that's a good point. Just because we haven't gotten there yet. So I'm a planner. And so, I always just want to, know exactly what to expect. But I think that just, being reminded that consistency is key, and, that sometimes it's easy to become relaxed on some things, but then you're trying to play catch up, trying to correct those things from, the times you have been more lenient. So I think consistency is something that sometimes I question myself whether or not, I'm being just too strict, with a baby. But it's reassuring to know that it's going to work in the long run. Yeah,
good. Natalie, you already went. Tim and Lauren, just seeing if you're awake, Natalie. Got your attention.
I think one of the things we talked about that was a good takeaway was the idea of giving yourself like space to think and not react, whether it's like what Nathan said with like go to your room, and then that gives you time to plan your action, how you're going to discipline them. Or like what you said, the idea of like, if they ask you a question, you don't know, say you're flustered and they want to have a snack. It's like such a simple question and you can easily snap and say no, but maybe you're just busy. So you say, I'll let you know in 5 minutes or whatever it is when I get done doing what I'm doing. And then I think that'll breed consistency and not be so reactive and acting on your emotions.
It reminds me of like with Chris's kids, I set the timer all the time. We could do the same thing with us if we wanted to. If we really want to live this thing out, we go, look, Daddy's going to set the timer, and when it goes off, I'll tell you. I don't know if anybody else does that, but what a great way to show them, hey, I can work on the timer too.
Yeah, we do a timer before bed, and that works. So as soon as it goes off, they know that's like it, and you go.
Yeah, so you guys could do the same thing for like, hey, I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes, and then I'll decide. Or then we'll talk about it. And then you're forced into some discipline, and you got 15 minutes to think about how you want to present it.
Yeah.
That just came to me. Nathan and Sammy?
I think the one thing right now that I'm personally working on is the consistency in disciplining each kid. Because when we were doing like Growing Kids God's Way, let's say Graydon was having more of an issue, and the way we discipline Graydon is very different than the way we're disciplining Colt with who's having issues now. So it's like spanking doesn't work for Colt, but that definitely worked for Graydon. So it's almost being consistent and finding what works for Colt now and how they're different in the way we handle each situation.
And next week we'll have quite a few tips on other things besides spanking as well, because there's a lot of things that work, and you don't have to be consistent you have to be consistent in how you discipline and why you discipline, but what you do is definitely going to look different for different kids. You know, you were the same way, Sammy, so you're getting your medicine. You were like, I remember I broke a ruler over your hand and you just said, so, you know.
That sounds like Colt.
I was like, what, when you were 22 or something like that?
That's when she said, I'm going to marry Nathan.
So
Nathan, I love you. I hope you know that.
I know.
Dave and Liz, how about you?
you're gonna be afraid to say anything, for you.
I mean, Dave was kind of laughing that he's going to start calling Tim to have a brief chat with another parent. But sometimes you do need an outside perspective if you've been doing the same thing over and over. And
That's really not a bad idea. Not, you know, it's actually a great idea that you guys could lean on other people, lean on one another, and especially guys that, like, when we're not good at something and somebody else is, that's awesome, you know. So it's not a bad thing, because sometimes we try to lean on each other and we're just not, you know, we're not able to give the other
over and over.
spouse like what they need as far as like that kind of coaching or that kind of support. So I think a lot of times it is better to talk to somebody else. We talk about that all the time when Victoria's having an issue that I can't help her with. I actually like it when she goes, I'm going to either go to God with this or I'm going to call a friend, because I feel like, oh, good, because I wouldn't have known what to do anyway, you know. So anything else, you guys? You're with Tim and Lawrence. You must have got a lot of good wisdom. Well,
Pretty much what everybody else said is kind of things we discussed.
good. Well, I would take time this week to actually look at that list on page 38 again, and you know, just back to the consistency and the patience that you guys are, like I said to Lauren earlier, that you're choosing to do things differently and choosing to come together and make sure, like, even like to Nathan's point about giving whatever 5, 10, 15 minutes before you spank, you could also spend 5 or 10 or 15 minutes talking as a couple about how you're going to handle the discipline, you know, versus just the one parent being the heavy, you know. I mean, how many times have you guys actually done that? And if you want to really learn how to do it together, take the space and talk about it, and then have a united front and go in together to discipline, whatever that may mean, you know. Talk to the child, spank the child, but do it together. And that's gonna speak volumes to a child about the unified front that you're bringing as a couple. So good. So next week, that's what we'll cover. We'll be talking more about actually how to discipline. Any questions, comments? It's 9 o'clock.